Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hello, Rob. It's me, Diana Perry Cruz.
And it's me, your lovable friend, Jackie.
Oh, boy. Well, everybody, it's been a little while since we've had a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we pick a topic and discuss it at length. But before we did that, I wanted to ask Jackie and Diana, summer's coming at a recording time, and we need to think of things to. It is actually, yes. In your time, listeners, it is. In our time, it's almost here, and we need to think of some things to do as parents with all of our kids. Do you have any fun ideas for kids in summer?
You know what kids love? Museums.
They do.
It's their favorite. Take them to as many museums as possible. And eventually they might actually come to love museums. If you keep
My kid just goes outside. I'm like, just go outside.
Going outside's good.
Later.
You need to have your sun protection. If you go to museums, you need to make sure it's a museum where you can touch things, probably, if they're little. If they're older, you probably still need to remind them, don't touch things. These are all important skills. And as behavior analysts...
You know what, Rob?
What?
I think the last museum we had to go to, I think I reminded you not to touch things, so...
What did you remind me not to? We went to the Harvard...
That clamshell.
Which one?
I don't know. You wanted to touch it.
Oh, we're at the Harvard's Natural History Museum to see the glass flowers. We went with book club guy Alan Haberman, and you can't touch the glass flowers. You also should not lean on the glass flower cases. They don't approve. Well, so many rules to know. And certainly if you're a family and you're a behavior analyst working with a family, you might need to help family learn like museum rules or what to do if your child doesn't want sun care. And as many of us have worked with many families in the past, sometimes when we say, here's a great way to do it, what's a great way to get to the museum? Why, a token economy for the museum, maybe like a DRO museum plan, right? And parents say, I hate that treatment. Why did you come up with such a terrible treatment? And many of us are left saying, well, I'm right and you're wrong, which is a terrible way to do parent training.
Hopefully that's not what you're doing.
Well, I hope that's not what you're doing. Luckily for us, even if it is what you're doing, we decided we needed to work on social validity when it comes to good parent training practices. And since all I've got is my DRO museum plan, we thought, let's call in some experts on this who've published in the field. And we were very fortunate that they're able to join us. And with us today are Dr. Roseanne Lesack and Dr. Jillian Wilson. Roseanne and Jill, thank you so much for being on our show today to talk about parent training.
We are very excited to be here with everybody.
Yeah, it's so fun. We listen to you guys, so being here is like a whole nother level.
Oh.
They also have their own podcast on parenting.
We do.
You guys want to tell people?
Oh, yeah. We can do plugs up front and plugs at the end, too.
We do. We have the Momentum Parenting podcast. We're on a little bit of a hiatus right now because life is a little bit overwhelming, but we'll pick it back up in the future.
But we have a full season out
We do.
of evidence-based parenting support. We have a few guest speakers on there. It's a great resource, at least to get you started.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. We'll remind listeners of that at the end as well. But so you're going to get a snapshot of what that podcast would sound like today, but then you'll have a whole season's worth of material. So if you like what you hear today, which of course I'm sure you will, then you got plenty more where that came from. So before, other than, certainly folks who have done parent training and folks who also have a podcast, Roseanne and Jill, could you tell us a little bit about yourself to the listeners, sort of how you came to be interested in focusing on parent training as kind of one of your areas of expertise?
Can I ask a question? Don't record this, but are we allowed to talk about the fact that we work at Regis all together or no?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. All right, Jill, I'll let you go first anyway.
Okay. So I think I've always been interested in the parent component of ABA because I worked with a lot of parents as a clinician. Like it was a very constant stream of parent training. But I became even more interested in it when I became a parent myself because thinking about bringing those things home, I could understand why people might be a little bit hesitant when you have multiple children or just multiple responsibilities. It makes it a lot harder. And I think part of the reason we got into this project was me scrolling through social media and seeing all these tips from various sources that some of them make sense, some of them don't make sense, some of them make you feel very guilty. Some of them, are just kind of all over the place. And I thought to myself, like, I have a lot of training in child development and child behavior. And even seeing these things on here is confusing me. Like, is this right? Is this the way I should be doing it? Like, am I a terrible parent? Like, so what is everybody else out there thinking? And that must be very confusing. So that's kind of how we started down this road. I pitched it to Roseanne and I was like, I'm very overwhelmed by all of this information. I can only imagine how other people are feeling. So.
And for me, I was a director of a feeding disorders clinic in Florida and a challenging behavior clinic when I was working in Florida. And it always was so important to me that it didn't matter how good the behaviors looked or how successful a child was in the clinic, because we could get some really good results, but it really mattered how well that child ate at home, or that the challenging behaviors decreased significantly and meaningfully in the home setting and not just in the clinic with us, and really led me to have a much more laser focus on the clinic is important, but it is not the end of our treatment whatsoever. And we really have to be focused from the outset of how do we get this success home? Otherwise, what's the point? And so that idea of parent training and having a parent buy into services, buy into the treatment, understand the treatment, do it with high fidelity has always been at the forefront of my mind, whether that's been in the clinic realm, in academia. And when Jill and I connected on this, again, also as a parent in the world, how do we really help support parents take our awesome technology of ABA and make it palatable, make it reasonable, and just make it successful at home, which is really where the important part of it is.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So both of you kind of came at your article and your project from slightly different, but similar goals. And how do we take what we know about parenting? How do we condense what's out there, decide what is not behavioral, what is or is not effective, and then see, is there like a magic package that both, works and tastes good for parents out there?
Yum, yum, yum.
Two great tastes that go great together, I guess, would be one way to do it. And before we get into that project, Diana, would you mind letting our listeners know what articles we'll be sort of focusing on today?
Oh, for sure. So our guests have provided us with 2 articles to discuss today, and they include an oldie but a goodie. The problem of parental non-adherence in clinical behavior analysis, effective treatment is not enough, by Allen and Warzak. That was published in JABA in the distant future, the year 2000. And hot off the presses, a brand new article by our 2 authors, Parent Perceptions of Behavior Analytic Interventions by Wilson and Lesack, and that was in Behavior Analysis and Practice 2024.
All right. So, Jill, you mentioned something I kind of wanted to start off with, just how much parenting advice and how many parenting books and tips there are out there. So kind of the 10,000-foot view. I mean, are we looking at just, it's differences in sort of philosophy, but tons of well-researched tips out there? Is it more just like, these sound good, like they're going to make good internet fodder, and there's absolutely no research behind them? Something else? Like where is the state of parent advice these days?
Well, it's kind of a combo of those things, I would say. There's some evidence-based information mixed in, but a lot of it is just, it sounds really good. Like, it sounds really nice. And I think parenting styles have changed over time, right? Some things continue on through the ages, some things drop off through the ages, which they probably should, right? But some things stick around. And I think a lot of what we're seeing right now, especially in social media, is this shift towards what people like to call gentle or responsive parenting styles, which I think on the surface are wonderful ideas. They're a great concept, but can sometimes lead a little bit towards the permissive end of parenting if it's taken too far. So, Roseanne, you're really good at the background of the different types of theories in parenting. Do you want to get to some of that?
Of course I do. Really, the accepted sort of parental theories out there with regards to at least what has support in the research literature, more in the psychology than in the ABA research, has to do with the idea of parenting styles. And this was based on Baumrand in 1966. And she and her colleagues and the research that came out of that sort of had these 4 different parenting styles, which were authoritarian, which was high demandingness and low responsiveness, permissive, which was low demandingness but high responsiveness. Then they had neglectful, which was low demanding and low responsive. And then authoritative, which was the goal, which was high demand. I have high expectations of my child with high response, that I have a lot of positive, let's say, social praise for the things that my child does well. And that has sort of been the paradigm of what the goal has been from the psychology literature coming out. And there has been this shift and this swing, as Jill was talking about, to this idea of permissive parenting or responsive parenting, where it really is a focus on an exclusive focus on the social, emotional health of the child and sort of being in partnership with your child and making sure that your child understands and hears. And these are all wonderful, or they at least sound good from the outset, but at some point then sort of reshift this permissive parenting, where if a child is responding in a very highly emotional way, otherwise known as a tantrum, it's just sort of allowed and in fact potentially even reinforced, because we're trying to we're getting a lot of attention during a tantrum to tell me know what you want, use your words, tell me how you feel, and again, on the surface, some of that may not be problematic unless there becomes a behavioral pattern where you're really reinforcing problem behavior. And that's sort of the loop, the behavioral loop that sometimes we can get, that parents get stuck in and sort of gets them in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone loves describing their feelings when they're upset.
Exactly.
I'm just saying, when I get upset and someone's like, Chucky, how are you feeling? I'm like, hold on. Let me do some introspection right now. That's exactly how it works with me. I don't get mad that they've asked me that at all.
And 3-year-olds are really good at introspection. Really good, especially during a tantrum. They're fantastic at it. So that's where we were coming from in terms of what can we add in from the ABA world. And one of my pet peeves, I'm just going to jump in and say it, is this idea of sort of hijacking ABA concepts, but saying it's not ABA, right? Like we would never use punishment. Absolutely no punishment. But we have a calm down corner. And when our child is really upset, we have them go to the calm down corner and calm down there.
No, Roseanne, I think you said it right. It's not, it's a place to go. It's no, we make them go. You're gonna calm down. You better
right now.
Yeah, I'm making the bully fist right here. You better calm down. And the calm down corner is pretty much what they end up. Look, I've seen a lot of these in practice. That sense of no, you're yelling and screaming. You must now calm down.
Yeah.
In a way separate. Yeah.
Which is not the way we would encourage a calm down corner to begin with. But even if you are using a calm down corner, that's negative punishment. And so this sort of co-opting of empirically validated behavioral interventions, but no, we don't do ABA, is one of the things that also really ignited our interest in this field.
Sure. So when we look outside of sort of, ABA methodological terms, I mean, are there practices that would sort of fall under the category of like, these are effective parenting strategies? And if so, how many of them are just, like you were saying, Roseanne, really just ABA methodologies with a more marketable name?
It's hard to quantify that because it depends which book you're reading, which website are you looking at, which, author who is a self-proclaimed, parenting coach who sort of, lifts the mantle for whatever their perspective is. But what we found was a smattering of behavioral interventions that we know are effective based on the research, along with things that sort of sound nice. Mm-hmm. So some of these validating comments. I know you're really upset, and I need you to take a few deep breaths, and I'm going to give you some space to calm down. Mm-hmm. Right? So there's a negative punishment conception there with this validating statement, which conceptually a validating statement essentially just be establishing the parent as a social reinforcer.
Or one of my favorites is like, I can tell you're really upset. I can tell you're feeling very angry, but I can't let you hit me. So I'm going to hold your hands until you can calm down. Right. That's a restraint procedure if you really boil it down, which is fine. You shouldn't let your kids hit you, right? But let's call a spade here. And I think we share that pet peeve, Roseanne and I, of people being really harsh about ABA and how awful it is and terrible and cold and robotic. But then they're using the same terms. Like it's frustrating because we know it's effective and we want people to understand that ABA can be used so nicely. It doesn't have to be what we think of it was, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, right? It can be, you can combine these components to make a really nice package.
And that's also why I like the Allen and Warzak article, even though it's 25 years old at this point. They also talk about, well, maybe we shouldn't call a spade, and we really should find a way to make our interventions palatable because we know they're effective. And if we can make it digestible or acceptable to parents, they're more likely to have a higher fidelity in our intervention.
Yeah, that's such a great article. And I feel like I've talked about this before, but like the title is kind of a red herring because you're like, oh, this article is going to talk about non-adherence of parental, procedures and how we don't think that they're doing a good job. And then the article is really not like that at all, right? The article talks about the context in which parents are attempting to operate and the complexities of that environment that they're in and all of the multitude of totally legitimate reasons why what you as the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed BCBA is recommending to them is just really not feasible at all in that setting. So it is a great article, and I think was before its time in terms of the compassion that it was, really putting into view in the article in terms of how we should be interacting with parents.
Yeah. Really quickly, kind of dipping into the Allen and Warzak article for folks who haven't read it, maybe in 25 years, or who haven't ever read it potentially. I know there's sort of four main areas in which that idea of parental non-adherence, or I don't know, do you use a phrase, Diana? It's sort of the idea of why might parents not want to use ABA methodology in their parenting might be a better way to look at it rather than non-adherence. Like, these parents are so mean, they're so bad, why don't they listen? But Allen and Warzak are kind of like four bins. One sort of, could it be more about the kind of the environmental arrangements or the EOs for change? Could it be about the stimulus generalization failings that often come with a lot of treatments, especially if we're thinking about them as, well, let's do it, like Roseanne, you mentioned, in the feeding clinic. Let's do it in the feeding clinic where we have all the control of all the environmental factors. And then, now do it at TGI Fridays where, like, God only knows what's going on. The idea of the response acquisition. So, the difficulty with, following through, learning to engage in the responses of the procedure. Are our procedures just too hard? And then just the general, like, the consequent events, are there other competing contingencies? But it sounds like one of the concerns that you were coming to your survey with was just that idea kind of the issues with the rules. Is the issue less about, ABA methodology is bad, I've used it and I don't like it, versus, I've heard it's bad, the rule is that's for other children, not my precious little snowflakes. Therefore, I'm not even going to engage you. I mean, was that a concern that you had, you kind of were worried about when you started your survey, or was it just sort of one possibility?
That's a good question. I think that we were thinking about a few different points of view. So the first one is, how is ABA perceived in kind of the general population? Because it does get its fair amount of bad press, and I don't think all of it is so off mark, right? There are some ways that we can improve. And I think one of those ways is really making sure that parents and caregivers are involved throughout the process so that the likelihood of them engaging and becoming part of that behavioral team increases over time. So we kind of think of our work as part of, I think, the antecedent component, maybe the MO component of, if they're going to be willing to engage in X, Y, and Z type of intervention, then let's really try to focus on that while we're working with their child so that at the end, they'll actually do it, right? Because it's not going to make any difference if we come up with a fantastic protocol that doesn't actually make sense for them, for their life, and or they don't agree with it. It's not something they want to do. They feel like it's too like robotic or cold or whatever it may be, right? So I think that was part of our initial conceptualization of the project as well.
And it seems to be that ABA is very well known in the neurodivergent community and seems to sometimes be sequestered in the neurodivergent community as opposed to just being really good for general parenting across all neuro functioning. And the idea that sort of your 3-year-old out on the street, tantrum, no diagnosis of ASD or ADHD, would really benefit from these interventions. And one of the pieces that we noticed when doing our lit review was that a lot of the parent training literature really had to do with the ASD population or the ADHD population. And we really believe that it's just really good parenting strategies in general for the full population. And there isn't that much research done on that. So that's where we were sort of starting our research to say, well, what does the general big population even know about ABA? Do they know anything? Have they even heard about it? Do they know much about it? What about if we sort of translate these strategies into different vignettes or examples? Are they using them?
Well, I really do love how you set up your survey. It felt very thorough. I'd love to hear more about it too, because any survey that uses multiple exemplars, I don't know how you do that, because anytime I'm asked to make an exemplar, I'm like, all right, I think of one and then two, and then I just make up the first one again, but I change like the characters or the setting, but it's the same. It's not as robust. And the examples you had in your paper were very good, because you not only had to make exemplars of different parenting practices in ABA, outside of ABA, you also had to then age them up for the different groups you were trying to find information. So please talk about how you developed such a very broad, not broad in the sense of, too much information, but just it covers the gamut of life and parenting life kind of questions. I'd love to hear about that.
I'm going to jump in first, and then I'm going to let Jill talk about the details. What's really nice about Jill and I is that she has young children and I have teenagers, middle school and teenagers. So we spent probably the most amount of time on that part of it, of trying to come up with those vignettes and sharing it with friends who have those age children. And what do you think about this? And does this sound right? So we definitely spent a lot of time on those pieces and pulled a lot from our personal experiences with where our children were developmentally. And it took a lot of time.
It did.
It was a right what you know kind of a situation then.
Very much so, yeah. And it was funny. I would have answered the question exactly the same way. We split it up I started with the really little kid examples because I was actively using them and hearing about them all the time. And then we kind of had a framework, and I said, okay, now we have to scale this up. Roseanne, what do you do with your kids? So how would this fit for a teenager? Like how would you talk about, punishment with a teenager, but this specific little type, or reinforcement that doesn't sound cheesy and weird with a teenager, right? So how can we make this sound realistic and like something that parents would actually do, right? So that they could identify themselves in those examples. And I think just honestly, being parents in that sense was enough for that component. It was tricky, don't get me wrong, because we had to come up with multiples of everything so that we would understand if people were responding consistently throughout the questionnaire. But it was actually probably one of my more favorite pieces of coming up of the whole project, because it felt real, right? It felt like things that people are actually doing and might ring true with them. And we heard from some participants after who were like, I got some really good ideas from this survey. And I didn't think of that, which I didn't see coming, quite honestly, but I probably should have, but I didn't see that coming at all. And some people were like, I didn't realize that that's what I was doing when I was doing it,
Right.
which was
Yeah.
also very interesting. So, and those are some of the pieces we didn't put in the paper, right? Because they were just emails from random people. But
I mean, you did mention that some, I think it was in kind of the discussion section, you were talking about the idea of dissemination, some of
Yes.
the barriers. I mean, you did mention some parents just saying, I feel like I learned, oh yeah,
Right.
now that I know what it is.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds very useful.
That's what I've been doing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Which, to circle back to what you were saying earlier, I mean, that's what to me is the beauty of behavior analysis, is that we have this conceptually systematic language that we can use to distill everything down and talk about it using sort of common terminology. And I know everyone has ground their gears or had their beef about things getting renamed as other cuter things, right? And sort of getting usurped by other populations. But no matter what you call it, the behavioral principles are the behavioral principles, and they are at play, whether we know them or have cute and clever names for them or not. They're in operation. So when we can identify those and then distill things down and use that terminology to categorize it, it can be really unifying across both folks who know about behavior analysis and then maybe those who don't.
Perfectly said.
I'm not any good at asking questions, which is why I'm not in charge of the podcast, but I do sometimes sound smart.
Someday you could be a full host if you turned all those statements into questions.
Questions?
Yeah, just do the thing you said and then add a question mark at the end of it becomes a question. That's how it works. So the survey I feel like I'm using all these, like, it's a survey, so it's super easy. Now, this was a great survey.
No, surveys are hard.
Surveys are hard.
It's really hard.
This was not just a Likert scale, like 1 to 7, reinforcement, question mark,
Yeah.
1 to 7. You wanted to look at both the perception of a variety of ABA interventions, the likelihood that parents reported they would use it, and that's where your age ranges and your examples are coming into play, because it's not very useful to say, what do you think about DRA? Most parents would probably be like, that sounds awful. I don't like it. Although, spoiler, they kind of didn't like DRA when you described what it was.
Right.
And then sort of looking at, and I'd love to hear why you picked this part specifically, the kind of the behavioral description alone, behavioral plus the validation alone, or I don't really care. It was sort of the crux of the big survey questions. But I'm curious, why was that validation piece? Because I feel like those first two, you could have just, it seemed like you could make a paper with just those two, but then you wanted to add in the discussion about validation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that kind of came out of a lot of the gentle parenting kind of information that's out there right now. Is a big component of gentle parenting is this big piece of validation, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just, how can we combine it with a evidence-based behavioral procedure to make it effective for actually behavior change, right? So validation alone probably won't change behavior. Right? It might make the child feel heard and understood, which are all great things, but they may not actually be learning anything from that, which is the goal when you have children, is to teach and to guide and all of those wonderful things. So how can we combine those things in a way that parents might be a little bit more apt to use a behavioral intervention that they maybe know is behavioral, right? If it's kind of combined with this really nice piece of validation. So we thought kind of peeling those pieces apart, untangling them to really understand, you might not use punishment like a timeout by itself, but would you use it if I said it was, for example, a calm down corner, right? Would you use it if we said, wow, I can tell you're really upset. I think you should go to the calm down corner to take a minute for yourself. Like, that sounds much better than like, you have to go sit in the timeout chair for 3 minutes. I'm going to set the timer, right? Your bum needs to stay in that seat until 3 minutes is done, right? Parents don't love that, and I don't blame them, right? But kind of adding that validation component is a nice way to connect with your child, but also, teach them this is something that we can't do, whether you choose to use something like punishment or not, or negative reinforcement or not, which, again, spoiler alert, people didn't like, which I thought was shocking. it was an interesting piece to combine.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think of also the idea that pop culture, whether we like it or not, that's what people are consuming all day, every day. And if anyone follows any parenting social media pieces, you click on one and all of a sudden 100 are popping up, and they're feeding you the same information about validation and gentle parenting. So if that's the reality on the ground, part of what we were talking about is how much can we actually change the reality on the ground versus how can we potentially maybe just add in some more effective strategies, knowing where the playing field is currently.
Mm-hmm.
And so knowing that feeling validations and identifying emotions and connecting during really hard times are just part of our pop culture parenting style as of today. Can we integrate that, but still have really effective strategies layered in so that it has some research behind it and can be more effective?
Hold on.
We kind of have a turducken.
I'm currently experiencing a tantrum. I need to hold on one second. Give me 1 second.
Sure.
I was going to say we kind of have a turducken situation happening here as well, in that the study is looking at parent social validity of the validation in part of the behavioral strategies. So we have a meta game that we're now.
Do you like when people validate
Yeah,
what you're doing?
exactly. Yeah. We'll leave it at that.
Correct. So we are validating parents' validation of their child while trying to up the game.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Hey, everyone. Sorry to interrupt the show, but we need to take a quick break. We'll be right back talking with Dr. Roseanne Lesack and Dr. Jillian Wilson about social validity of parent training. We'll be right back.
Hi, do you want to be a BCBA, also known as a board certified behavior analyst?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Massachusetts to get your graduate degree just minutes outside of Boston.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education, dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years.
And our 2022 graduates had a 92% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy approved fieldwork placements, ethics mini handbooks, PhD levels professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland if interested.
And don't forget, our program is accredited by the Association of Behavior Analysis International, or ABAI, as a Tier 1 master's degree program.
Don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu.
regiscollege.edu.
One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there.
Bye.
And we are back. But before we continue our conversation with Dr. Lesack and Dr. Wilson, I want to remind our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved, and by listening, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish the episode, then go to our website, abainsidetrack.com. You can also click the link in your podcast player and enter in some key information about yourself, as well as 2 secret code words. These are secret guest code words. And the first of those code words is alarm clock. ALARMCLOCK. It's the clock probably by your bedside that rings to wake you up. For many of you, you will also call that your phone. But let's go back in time to when we had a nice alarm clock with a little bell, kind of dinged back and forth, right? Alarm clock. Anyway, let's get back to our interview with Dr. Lesack and Dr. Wilson. It does always feel funny in a lot of those validations that, like, I have, again, it's one of those things of like, I don't mind, like, if you know, I think if you want to add in, like, I see that you're upset, or I understand this is tough. But it does sort of end up feeling like I am tacting my parenting style to you right now. I'm labeling, it is timeout time, or it is response blocking, or it is first then.
Right, it becomes an SD. all of those validations all of a sudden are now an SD for punishment.
I know. And then you get to worry like, oh God, are all these validations becoming these like CMORs of like, I see you're mad. No. I know what it means when you tell me you see I'm mad. I'm going to get in trouble. As opposed to what I assume everyone thinks, which is I'm going to label it. And then you're going to feel so much better that I see you and I see your emotion. But yeah, again, one of those on its face, nothing wrong with validation. However, how easily could it become just the worst possible thing you could end up doing? You could pair it incorrectly. If you're using bad, parenting strategies, does that just end up making the validation invalid to the individual or acute, an SD of some kind?
So all of that would be amazing research. I think would be really hard research to do.
Yeah.
Especially in the natural environment, which I think is where all of this, needs to be and should be happening. But I think part of it is if it makes it more palatable for parents to integrate that, even if it decreases the efficacy a little bit, right? Is it worth it or not? And that's what parents have to determine. Or thinking through then with parents of, hey, we've been using this validation plus the strategy for a while, and it's not moving the mark. Let's just take away the validation and let's just see if that changes anything. Are we reinforcing the problem behavior based on that validation or,
sure,
beginning that chain of problem behavior?
So in the survey, I'll quickly list off kind of the general areas you were looking at, and then please let me know if I'm missing any. So I mean, it was sort of the broad categories that you were looking at around, say, antecedent manipulations, reinforcement, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment. But then you use specific examples to describe a variety of those strategies. So first, then statements, preparation statements for a transition, including a child in making alternate choices, validating feelings, which you talked about that one, praise, earning, tangibles, reprimands, response cost, response blocking with reprimands, and then just sort of like giving in. You phrased it better, but basically, would you ever use strategy of just like giving them in? So just reinforcing whatever the tantrum or the problem was, timeout, and then DRA being included, using negative reinforcement. But just specifically, you kind of went through a list of various kind of common ABA type parenting practices in addition to the validation. Were there any big ones that I totally forgot there? And it's a long list, and you'd have a lot of examples.
I don't think so. I think you got them all. That was very
nice
impressive.
job, Rob.
Yeah.
Thank you. I take a lot of notes when I read these articles to prepare. So glad that worked out. All right. So you've got all these, you bin them into the different age groups. So sort of the early childhood, the sort of mid childhood to early adolescence, and then adolescence to late teen years. You tailored your examples. So when parents were, shown these and said, what do you think of these? Would you use these? They knew specifically what you were talking about. You didn't just say, what do you think about timeout? Or what do you think about, DRA systems? You had nice examples of what was going on in each practice you were talking with. And then from that, you got a lot of responses from parent. It was a good response rate, I think. What was it like?
You had you did it for a long time. You kept waiting
I was going to say
and waiting.
huge.
Yeah, we left it open for almost 9 months, but I would say like 99% of our responses happened in the first month. But we were emailing and really trying to get more people to respond, especially a more diverse subject pool, but it did not work out as we had hoped. But
we tried really hard. We contacted a lot of organizations.
We did.
You mentioned that in the follow-up. You mentioned that as limitations.
Yes.
That this was a pretty somewhat homogenous group of mothers that mostly responded.
Yes.
Not completely.
Which, I guess is not that dissimilar from who is typically doing a large portion of the parenting in the U.S. as it is now. Although that's changing, which is great. But
consuming some of the more prevalent pop culture trends.
Yes. Yep. That's a good point. Yeah. So we still would have loved to hear more voices, obviously, but we kept it open for 9 months. We got, I believe it was 106 respondents, and we had to we actually got more than that, but we had to exclude 18 of them for various reasons. But we thought it was a pretty good amount of respondents for, what we were looking for, but they were quite similar in demographic. But the survey took, I would say, about 20 minutes. If you had a lot of children, it took more time, unfortunately, because
Right, because if they were different ages,
Yes.
you had to do it for each
Yeah, for
age.
each
So
age.
like I would have to do it all
Three.
3 different times
Yes.
because my kids are spaced out.
Yes. Although if they fell into the same general age group, so our age groups were like 1 to 5, 6 to 12, and 13 to 18. So if all of your kids fell into one large chunk, then it was a little bit easier. But if you had children that were spanned in age, it just took a long time.
I would have had to do it twice,
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
but I
Diana.
didn't fill it out, just so you know.
Thanks, Diana. We would have had 107,
I'm so sorry.
maybe 108 if Rob had responded.
I didn't fill it
Oh.
out either.
I don't remember. Every
109.
time we have a survey, I'm like,
like
did I
a,
get that survey? What did I do? Did I just
We
delete
had it, but I
don't
thought
know.
it was
like a conflict.
Yeah.
It was a conflict of interest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But not for
We know
you,
Jill
Rob.
and Roseanne outside of this context. This isn't the first time we're meeting.
No, we meet on a
Go Regis.
semi-weekly basis. So it probably was inappropriate, but not for you, Rob. So I don't know what happened.
I might not have gotten it. I
Called out.
don't know. I don't
Called out
remember. I
on
have to
air.
look. I feel bad. I try to do all these surveys,
It's
but you
okay.
get bad days.
Okay, we'll get you the next time around.
It said hello first name. Does that make you more likely or less
Little
likely?
less
Less
likely.
likely,
Little
way
less
less likely.
So anyway, yeah. So we went through like the general demographic information, then caregiving information, right? So you had to have a child between 1 and 18 years old. You had to be a primary caregiver at some point in the day, right? For some reasonable amount of time, right? Because you have to have actual contact with your children. And we asked things like, what's your childcare arrangement? How many years have you been parenting? Things like that. And then we got into more of the parenting style. So what would you identify as your parenting style? Have you changed your parenting style over time? If you have, what were the factors that influenced that change over time? And then the last bucket was that behavioral component. So the likelihood of using those behavioral strategies, your feelings about them, and then which one you preferred between just straight out behavioral, cut to the chase, behavioral with some validation in there. Would you use both or would you use neither? So that was kind of our general overlook of the questionnaire.
So when all was said and done, I mean, you mentioned in the paper a couple patterns that you saw in terms of like which parenting groups endorsed what, which strategies sort of got the highest endorsement, which strategies kind of got kicked to the curb. Do you mind? You certainly, we don't need to go through sort of every single one, but were there any that really stood out to you as, yep, this sounds in line with what we're seeing on those parenting blogs or parenting social media, or just, wow, surprise, did not think that was going to be the response that we got for whether it was a treatment X or a group, kind of group dynamic based on age?
I was really surprised, and I talked about this a little bit a couple minutes ago. I was shocked that people did not like negative reinforcement. Now, I know other people might not be shocked by that, but I think it's a really good technique. Like, let somebody out of something for doing a certain amount of something else, right? Like, in theory, I think it could work really well, but I think parents do not like letting their kids out of things if they don't have to, right? So I guess it does make sense when you really think about it, but it can be really effective. And I was kind of sad that people wouldn't use it. That's the one I was most surprised about. I don't know if Roseanne has a different answer.
No, I think we were both shocked by the negative reinforcement. And then this is where, I think it's hard for a lot of people, clinicians, students, to grasp the concept of reinforcement and why it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And why does that work, but I'm letting them out of something. It sort of parallels for me why some parents don't like positive reinforcement, because I hear a lot, well, my child should be doing that anyway. Why am I going to reward them for something that they should be doing? And shouldn't the reward be intrinsic versus extrinsic? And that whole conversation, which we can all laugh about, and what I always say, which I always respond to. So if you didn't get paid, you'd still go to work every day? the answer is always no. That's why you volunteer for
Right.
some things that you really enjoy. But
Roseanne,
sort of
what
those,
do people tell you when you use that, when they give you the intrinsic kind of roll eyes and you give them the example? Do they say, Roseanne, oh my God, you're right? Or
well,
did they?
I try to show them that I really am right. But it's a really interesting conversation that I usually, again, stay away from the ABA jargon. And I say we all really like to be acknowledged for the hard work that we do. I like when somebody tells me, thank you for a really good dinner that you just spent a lot of time doing.
Mhm.
I really like it when when I've worked on something really incredibly hard. Sometimes I'll go get a massage afterwards.
Mhm.
After working really hard for a month, I'm going to say, at the end of this month, I'm going to get a massage. And then parents will be like, oh yeah, I do that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, let's do it for our kids also.
Right.
I think there's this disconnect. Right, go ahead, Jackie.
No, we should be making dinner. That's our jobs as parents.
Right, exactly.
You
And it
should
should
like
be
it.
good.
It should be intrinsic.
Don't
So-
you enjoy caring for your family by folding their clothes and putting them away for them? Isn't that part of your humanity?
Well, isn't that negative reinforcement? Then they will complain. I fold the
Yeah.
clothes so they stop yelling at me about folding my clothes. So I think that, again, some of this understanding of what these strategies really are and why they work and why they are really natural in our daily environment is a foreign concept for some parents. And I think that's what our job is as behavior analysts, is to show those live examples in our everyday life that these are things that we do as adults, and why wouldn't we do them with our children also?
I was also really surprised initially that as children got older, the fewer interventions parents were willing to try or use. And I guess when you think about it, it is logical, right? You've probably tried a lot of things. You're tired by then. You just want them
I'm
to
just so
like go to
tired.
college, get out of my house
Oh.
right now. I'm just kidding.
They
Right,
fight
well-
back so much more at the older age.
Their language
And there's always an
skills,
excuse.
Yeah, their language skills are much better when they're teenagers than they are when they're little, right? There's a lot of reasons why. But in particular, like parents weren't as likely to use things like DRA with older children, which I thought was surprising. Like
I was surprised DRA kind of got kicked to the curb of all
Yeah.
the various the reinforcement strategies. It was, and I mean, even with the examples, I kept wondering, did they still not quite get
Right.
what was happening? Even with these, like the examples were, they were good, but maybe they weren't specific enough,
Right.
or
that's
just
what we
something about
wondered
I don't know.
too. We wondered that too, especially for the negative reinforcement examples. Like maybe they were just not worded in a way. We tried really hard to make them like as understandable as possible across the board, but everybody has their own learning history, right? So they're going to interpret things a little bit differently. So maybe there was an issue there, but that was very surprising to me. And I think over time, like parents kind of narrowing the types of interventions that they're willing to try is logical, but it's also a really useful piece of information, especially when you're working with older children or that transitional age group, right? So you might kind of focus your interventions for those age groups in areas where parents are more willing to implement those types of interventions with their children.
And as kids age, fewer and fewer of their reinforcers are found in the home and specifically tied into parent interactions. So I think that might be part of it too, is as parents of teenagers, you have less influence and control in that situation. So that might be part of why you see parents sort of pulling back from some of these strategies.
Yeah, good.
Right.
Good
Or
insight.
parents perceive that they have less control in things like a phone, which is a huge reinforcer for teens. I think a lot of parents don't think that they have any control over that it is a right that their child has their phone as opposed to a privilege, as opposed to a reinforcer that can be removed. And I think that's a part of that swing to permissive parenting, where parents don't feel like they have the ability to take away the car keys or not allow their child to go out or take away their phone or turn off the internet or, put a password on the internet so that the child can't have access. I think some of those pieces feel very foreign and harsh to parents.
Yeah, and punitive
and punitive
because they're so big, right? Like
they're such a big
encounter
part
that
of their
as well.
child's
It's
life.
like, oh, and it's just a big deal to do it,
Right, but as opposed to maybe coming up before your child gets a phone to have a behavioral contract for how do you earn phone usage? Not that it needs to be taken away, but how do you actually earn phone usage and have that to be clear in the behavioral contract before your child gets a phone or before your child can drive. And I think that's potentially a step that's missed, that it's just sort of, well, my child has their license, I guess they just drive now.
I'm really always shocked by that too, Roseanne, that sense of why is everything couched as it magically appears until such time as I am so angry at you that I say, fine, now it's gone. Because of your behavior, I'm taking all these things away. And God only knows if they'll ever come back, but they probably will because you know how to use the internet better than me and you could get it back without actually changing your behavior. Why it's never I'm so proud that you're old enough for this responsibility. And then that behavioral contracting language. It's one of those things that you always sort of think, I assume a lot of parents must do this. And then you sort of bring up the idea of it. Another reason that I was my surprise for some of these responses is, especially at the older age group, how few parents admitted, because I know many of them, as much as they don't want to give in, I'm sure many of them, their primary go-to strategy for their 17 and 8-year-old is just whatever, fine. Like, I just to give in. I mean, maybe Diana and I are just the worst parents that ever had a teenager ever. And we're the only ones who've ever given in to our teenager. But I'm pretty sure that some of the responses were based more on their wishful parenting of how they want to parent rather than the actual practices going on in their house. But again, it's a social validity survey, not a accuracy of parenting at your house survey. But it still was very surprising how some of those trends that feel like, well, this must be how it is, right? This feels just not kind of not in the cards. They weren't coming through in the survey.
Yeah. Right. And no one's gonna admit that, I do actually give in to my teen because I want them to like me. I want them to see me as a friend. No one's saying that.
No, I don't think so either. I also thought the extinction category was interesting, especially with all of the focus on validation all the time, is this idea of extinction, especially if we're talking about attention maintained behaviors, right? So people the largest group of people endorse neutral feelings about extinction, right? And as children got older, they were less likely to use it, which I thought was really interesting. You can control it much easier with smaller children, right?
You do everything much easier with smaller children, right?
Yeah, yes. But you know, 47% of people said that they were very likely to use extinction with kids age 1 to 4. Which that's kind of opposite of what we're seeing in our pop culture recommendations right now of give your child a lot of attention during these times where they're struggling, which again, you choose your parenting style. If that's what you choose to do, that's totally up to you. But, that wasn't congruent to me. I was confused by that angle. Like, this is very interesting. Maybe it's not having as much of an effect as we thought it was, or again, maybe it was misunderstood in our examples, right? But a lot of the parenting advice out there says right now, like, if you walk away from your child or you let them have a tantrum alone, you're ruining them for the rest of their lives. They are never going to be attached to you. It becomes this huge.
Right. Am I traumatizing?
Yes.
Am I traumatizing my child?
Geez, yeah.
Right. Like, or, the idea of cry it out or the Ferber method of sleep training has become like, your child is going to hate you for the rest of your life if you sleep train them. Right. When all the research tells us, like, that's not true, guys. Like, there's no adverse effects that we're seeing in the literature. Right. But it's terrifying for parents. So to see those numbers, I thought was really interesting that people actually are willing to use these things, at least up to age 12. And then it's off the board.
Well, Allen and Warzak also addressed this in their article as well, is that if extinction isn't immediately effective, then the parent's behavior goes on extinction and they stop it, right? Which makes sense. In younger kids, that extinction burst is much shorter. And, after 5-10 minutes, the tantrum is over. I always tell parents that tantruming is a performative art. If there's no audience, there's no performance often, and it goes away quickly, as opposed to older adolescents who can really hold a grudge.
Mm-hmm.
That extinction burst can last a lot longer. And that side eye is like a dagger in your heart. So in working with parents to know that like the extinction burst actually means it's working. You have something meaningful that can be effective if you are seeing an extinction burst, but it's really hard to like, have and steel yourself to make sure that you can, follow through with it. It's really not an easy task to expect parents to do all the time, especially in those older ages.
Sure. Well, I think that kind of leads to some of the later discussion points, sort of, and you mentioned a few of them earlier. I think the parents writing back and saying, I didn't even know that's what that was. That actually sounds like a good strategy now. I mean, how much of what we know about effective strategies versus what parents know about effective strategies could just be, fixed or brought into better alignment with some psychoeducation? Like Roseanne, your example of, you're using extinction. Here's why it might be best. Here's what it's going to feel like. Like letting them know that this is a part of the process, not so much to convince them you should use extinction, but like you said, to let them know this is what it could be. So if this strategy sounds, congruent with your values as a parent, here's how you're going to use it correctly. Here's what it's probably going to feel like. Here's how terrible you're going to feel about it. But here's why you need to either stay the course or decide maybe this isn't right for you, and give them better pros and cons about the strategies. And as much as I feel like as behavior analysts, we like to talk to families about why we're making recommendations of treatments, sometimes I wonder if we do as much work as we think we're doing to explain these options and explain what these things are to parents.
So, plug alert, Jill and I created a parenting curriculum to sort of counterbalance this gentle parenting movement that's out there, to sort of help swing the pendulum back towards the center, or even more towards behavioral interventions.
Did you call it the mean parent? So you can like really move it the other way?
No, not mean. It's going to be common sense. It is common sense. It is effective. Right? So we actually created a parent workshop curriculum, momentumparenting.com. Feel free to take a look, and really modeling off what is out there in the ether world out there with regards to all the parenting curriculum that's talking about the gentle parenting to sort of realign. Well, but let's make sure that it actually is effective and is based in solid behavioral principles. So that's some of the work we're trying to do, is to educate parents on some of these things and make it palatable, make it understandable, and make it behavioral, because we know that's what's effective.
And I think one thing that's really important to remember is, and this is something, we all learn from each other, even after we, pass our exam and have been in practice for all this time. One of the things I've learned most from Roseanne is behavior analysts are terrible salespeople. Right? We are not good at selling our wares. Right? We get really focused on our jargon, and sometimes it's just really hard to get out of that pattern. And I think so many of our interventions are effective, but we're not great at selling them. And I don't mean like used car salesman style. I mean like, this is something that will really help you in your parenting and in your relationship with your child and your family. Try this. Like, how can we get the point across a little bit more effectively and better, I guess, overall? I don't know. Yeah.
The field of dreams strategy, if you build it, they will come, does not really panned out.
No.
I think we have a good product.
Yeah, I'm going to share an example of a conversation with a parent who needed help with toileting. And I was working in a toileting clinic, and the parent came to me and said, I do not want a behavioral approach. I do not want ABA. I do not want behavioral. It's horrible. It's absolutely the worst thing. What do you do? I said, well, I'm going to tell you what I do. Everything I do is child-centered. The first thing I'm going to do is watch your child and see what they do and see where they are successful and where are their areas of growth, right? That's baseline.
Right.
Then I'm going to figure out the first teeny tiny step that I know is going to be the easiest thing for them to be successful. And then I'm only going to move on to the next step once they're successful at step 1, because that's the right thing to do. And I'm going to make sure that before we move on to the next step, I can prove that they are successful there before even going on. It's going to build their confidence. It's going to build their success. That's a fading procedure. And that's data collection and data analysis. So I didn't have to use any of those words to tell a parent that I was using a 100% child-centered approach to what was going to happen, because I'm looking at the child's behavior the entire time. And at the end, I did not want to be duplicitous. So at the end, I said, and that's what I define as a behavioral approach. And if that's something that's interesting to you, happy to work together.
Okay, I was going to ask if there was a twist at the end of treatment where you were like, and by the way, this was behavioral the whole time. No,
that wouldn't be
I
very
would tell the parent at the beginning, and I would say, and that's what I define. You know, I don't know what you've done with ABA and other practitioners, but that's how I define a behavioral approach. And if that sounds good to you, then, you know, let's work together. And if not,
I like that phrasing. That's how I define. I think that can be a missing piece of like, how do you not just lie, even though you're telling them exactly what you're doing and their behavior? Like, how do you thread that needle? I like that phrasing, Rosa.
And it's hard. It's hard to thread that needle, to be very clear and honest about what we do and how we do it, but also make it digestible and understandable to parents out there.
There's just so much information out there, and it's so overwhelming. And like, you know, we've been parents for 17 years, and every day I feel like I'm doing everything wrong still.
I mean, luckily as parents, we have a lot of free time to read and digest all of this research. You know, there's no rush.
Yeah, and like
leisurely time.
Like, you know, we're parents and behavior analysts, but as parents, all of us, I think, can agree, like, this is the most important thing that we're doing, right? And you just don't want to mess it up, and you want your kids to trust you, and you want you to have a good rapport with your kids, and you want your kids to be well adjusted, and you want your kids to be ready to like tackle hard things in their lives, and you want it all for them. So it is hard because I see the same stuff. If I go on social media, I see all of these same things, and it is hard to worry that you're doing it all wrong all the time. So like, I 100% see how parents could very easily be against the types of strategies that we know are effective, in large part because of the language that we use and the vehicle that those things arrive in. But I love the way that you described it, Roseanne, because it is. I mean, everything that we do is individualized, and it is child-centered, right?
Yeah.
And it can be tailored as needed for that particular family's needs.
I mean,
and it should
the
be.
whole point. Yeah, that's the whole point. I think that's what we're missing in some of our sales tactics, if you will, is like, this is one of the most individualized treatments that has this amount of research backing it, right? Like, a lot of psychotherapy, of course, can be useful, but the evidence that's backing behavioral interventions is robust and it's clear. How can we package this in a way that is, like we've been saying across the board, is like digestible, understandable, reasonable for parents who are scrolling and seeing all of these conflicting messages and sometimes just panicking, like, am I screwing up my child from day one?
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's one of the things I realized becoming a parent is like, you know, you get through those first stages of pregnancy and you're like, okay, you're going to be home free for now. Like, I don't have to worry anymore. And then it's like, oh, that was funny, right? Like, you just, from the minute that second line shows up, you're going to be worrying forever. Like, that's how it is. So how can we support parents in the best way to feel confident in their decisions and not be looking for other sources that might be confusing or stressful or just, you know, incorrect,
ineffective.
Ineffective, right? And I think parenting is hard enough at baseline. We do not need to make it any harder by throwing all this crazy information at parents. Like, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel
and the idea of wasting parents' time or energy or resources is probably one of the most unethical things we can do. And so if we know that there's research that shows that something's effective, that's where we need to start. And that's where our behavioral interventions are. It's the baseline of where we should always be starting.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like this is a good point to move into the dissemination station. Oh, everyone, you can hear when Jackie does the sound effect on her good mic. She got out the good mic. Oh, what? What's this? What's this symbol? I'm getting a signal from the conductor. Sorry, listeners, you can't see the signal. I'll explain it to you later. So this is the part of the show where we sort of
It was
kind
verbal
of
behavior.
wrap up, summarize. And I certainly don't, I know both of you are doing a lot of work. You have your curriculum as well. So not extrapolating from a survey as to, and here's what everyone needs to do from here on out. But I do think you brought up a lot of points. You saw a lot of those sort of bear out in the research that you've done, really looking at how to improve at least our ability to work with parents. Certainly our psychoeducation with parents is going to need to improve, whether it's through our storytelling ability, our marketing ability, just our ability to describe things without using jargon in meaningful ways to families. We sort of have some areas in your survey that, kind of look at some general trends that may hold true for larger groups in terms of just the breadth that parents want to hear about or are comfortable hearing about at different ages, but we don't exactly know why that is. Are there any other sort of practices that BCBAs who are working with families really should be taking into account that kind of we haven't gone over that you think they should know when they're talking about disseminating effective behavior strategies, parenting strategies?
One of the things I always tell parents is that behavior change is hard. And that was part of the Allen and Warzak article also about self-control training for parents.
Mm-hmm.
Behavior change is hard. We're expecting our kids to stop tantruming, to increase appropriate asking, to learning how to take a break, to taking deep breaths, to stop hitting, all of these different behaviors. And we expect our 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 12-year-old to be able to do this. But then when I speak with parents of like, okay, so I want you to stop yelling. They're like, oh, I can't do that. Sorry. And they have a fully formed frontal lobe. And I think this idea, and it's very humbling, the idea that parents struggle with behavior change because it's hard. And it's our job as clinicians to really figure out what is the function that is of the parent's behavior that is impeding their behavior change, just like we would with any child or any client. Figure out what the function of the parent behavior is. Behavior change is hard. Help support them and come up with strategies that are individualized for the parent so that the parent can change their behavior and therefore work on changing the child's behavior. And I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways that I think we as clinicians need to do. It's learn better at is understanding the function of parents' behavior so we can change that behavior based on individualized treatment for the parent as well.
Yeah. And I think, from specifically our study, it seemed like most parents preferred examples of behavioral interventions that did include some sort of validating statement. Now, I wouldn't say let's just include it across the board, but I think that is telling us that, we shouldn't just be including parents in the goal setting portion of our treatment. We should be including them in the selection of the treatment protocols as well. Right? And that might sound a little bit much, and it might be sometimes, but if you're looking for long-standing change and you're looking to really make an impact, across the board for this child, having the parents' involvement is the key, right? That's going to get them what they need when they leave your office or they leave your clinic or they leave school, whatever it might be. So getting the parent on board, making them a part of the team by including them as much as possible and including their preferences for the types of interventions that they're delivering. We know that choice is more reinforcing. So, including that component can really only help in parental adherence and treatment fidelity and things like that.
Excellent. I know sometimes we'll talk about kind of next steps, but I think you both mentioned some things that and some other resources that BCBAs can look at in the form of your podcast. I know you have your curriculum. So would you mind just talking a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I think moving forward, in terms of particularly this research, I think we're going to continue looking into this, hopefully getting some more diverse viewpoints so that we can really get a sense of what the larger population thinks. And then potentially moving towards, what do consumers of ABA think? What does it look like in the actual ABA realm of people who are actually involved in this treatment with their children? And what do they think about each of these processes and the inclusion of validation? Because this component might not be as important if you're talking about parents of solely children with, level 3 autism, right? They might not necessarily care about the validation component because, their child's behavior is so severe that they are really struggling on a day-to-day. Right. So figuring out those components, I think, will also be helpful for the literature and just getting a sense of those who are actually involved in ABA. What are they looking for? What do they prefer, if you will? Roseanne, you want to talk a little bit about momentum?
Absolutely. And one of the areas of research before I jump into momentum parenting is the idea of, Allen and Warzak was all about why weren't, parent adherence to treatment. I think taking a step back first is, well, before we even talk about how do they adhere to ABA interventions, what do they think about ABA interventions? What are their private thoughts about ABA interventions? And one of the things that we're considering looking at is sort of like sweeping the web. And what does the big bad internet have to say? What are parents saying on the internet about ABA in general? And what's sort of our identity out there, which I think is an interesting sort of next question. And with regards to momentum parenting, like I said, part of what we're trying to do is offer an alternative parent support, parent training model that isn't embedded in the permissive parenting perspective, but really more of evidence-based behavioral solid strategies where parents can sign up, take modules. There's a really lovely workbook that goes with it to help really support parents in changing their behavior, because that's really where our goal is, to have parents change their behavior, to help parents change their children's behavior in the most effective way possible. So that's where we're putting a lot of our efforts and energies to help support parents in that realm.
Excellent. And then final plugs, if you don't mind, where can everyone find everything? Or if they want to listen to the podcast, what is it again?
It is the Momentum Parenting Podcast to go along with our courses through Momentum Parenting. We have a couple different courses on there, hopefully adding some courses and then in near future that are kind of more tailored to different families with different diagnoses in their families, things like that. So the Momentum Parenting Podcast and Momentum Parenting, you can find our lovely article that was published in Behavior Analysis and Practice called Parent Perceptions of Behavior Analytic Interventions, and hopefully some follow-up research in the future on the same topic, because I think we're both invested now. We want to know more.
We want to know more. We always want to know more. And so I know if you said it, Jill, but it's www.momentumparenting.com.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, great. Well, Dr. Roseanne Lesack and Dr. Jillian Wilson, thank you so much for coming on the show. We look forward to hearing more about this, a topic that on its face sounds like we must have talked about this before, but that twist of that social validity and asking some of these questions, yikes, I think we put the cart before the horse there when it came to parenting strategy. So it's really, really great to have this research out there that we can now build upon as practitioners in this work that we all do. So thank you both so much for coming on and talking with us.
Thanks for having us.
Big thanks once again to Dr. Lesack and Dr. Wilson for joining us to talk about this very important topic. We've talked about parent training before, but I think this is definitely a new way to approach that discussion and answered a lot of questions that we probably should have asked earlier than this. So I'm glad that they are out there doing the research and continuing their work on momentum parenting. And we'll have links to all of that in your podcast player and in the show notes for this episode. But before we can wrap up our show, we have our last segment, Pairings. Diana, take it away.
All right. Pairings is the part of the show where I tell you about past episodes you might want to check out if you enjoyed this one. So we've talked about parents and parent training a few different times on the show. If you want to check out those episodes, they include episode 19. We talked about parent training as it related to challenging behavior. Episode 103, where we discussed parent stress. Episode 254, titled Improving Parent Training Practices. And then very recently, episode 309, where we discuss contextual family supports, and episode 313, which just came out, which is ethics time, summer grab bag. But we discussed an article in there, the Guinness and Atkinson article, where they did a qualitative analysis of some varied teaching strategies with parents. So that might be relevant to you as well. I also like to recommend a snack for you to enjoy while you're listening to these past episodes that relates to the topic. And so the snack for today is Chinese quote unquote takeaway. And I've called it takeaway because I'm actually referencing, since we call it takeout here in America, but I'm referencing, once again, I've been doing this a lot, I think, the Bluey episode where Bandit attempts to take the children to pick up the Chinese takeaway, and basically everything goes wrong that could go wrong. It is a complete comedy of errors. If you haven't checked that episode out, I think it's from season 1. You should go review it, but it is a great reminder. It's hilarious, and it is a great reminder that things do not always go as planned, even when you have the best of intentions when you're working with young children. So.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Diana. And thank you all so much for listening to ABA Inside Track. If you haven't, please leave us a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. You can find us online at abainsidetrack.com, where you can find links to learn more about our guests, as well as to read all of the articles we discussed and to get some of those older episodes in pairings. If you want even more ABA Inside Track content, join us on Patreon, patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where for subscribing at any level, you're able to get the episodes a week ahead of time and get access to our polls. But if you'd like some free CEs, you can join at the $5 level to get access to our quarterly listener choice episodes, where our listeners tell us what episodes we'll be doing. And at the $10 and up level, you're able to get all of that, plus access to our 2-hour-long book club episodes, which again come out every quarter, and get free CEs for that, as well as discounts on other CEs in the store. That's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. And you don't want to miss out, because we have a good summer read, The Body Keeps the Score, coming out very soon, unless you're not a patron, in which case you have to wait for it to come out a different summer, not this one.
And everyone, don't forget that last secret code word is horse, HORSE, that four-legged animal. It eats oats, it likes to jump over things, runs in the Kentucky Derby. Horse.
Well, that brings us to the end of the show. Thanks again to our guests, Dr. Lesack and Dr. Wilson. Some other big thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro-outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. We'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye!
Bye.